So good morning, everyone. To those of you in the room, my name is Gita Umbure, and I'm the Food Security Technical Advisor on IDEAL. I'd also like to welcome those of us, those who are joining us online. We at IDEAL are really excited to be hosting the three chiefs of party from Ethiopia, Bangladesh, and Zimbabwe. It's really exciting for us to have field voices coming through. And also to welcome Penny, who's going to be our moderator. So I'll go ahead and just open this introduction topic. Also introduce our speakers this morning, and I'll hand it over to Penny and our presenters. So for those of you who are new to IDEAL, I'll say a few words about IDEAL, but really want to encourage everybody who's new to IDEAL to visit our website. It's fsnnetwork.org, and there's a page there about us talking about IDEAL. But IDEAL is a 5-year Leader with Associates award that's funded by USAID's Office for Peace. We just started in late 2018, so we're still in first year of implementation. The program is implemented by a consortium led by Save the Children that also includes the Kaizen Company, Mercy Corps, and Tango International. So the idea behind IDEAL is to create a platform through which implementers and stakeholders of food security programs, both on the development side and the emergency side, can come together and learn together and seek to address knowledge and capacity gaps across the implementing community. Some of you might be familiar with TOPS, which was a predecessor to the IDEAL program. And IDEAL will be continuing many of the successful initiatives that were under TOPS. We will continue to do a small grants program. Some of you might be aware that we have 2 RFAs, request for applications, one for a micro grant of up to $50,000, and another one for a program improvement award of up to $100,000. So those 2 RFAs are currently open. We are accepting applications for that through, I believe, the end of this month. So in terms of what we do, we focus on cross-cutting aspects of food security programs. So TOPS are focused mostly on technical sectors. We are looking at cross-cutting elements. So among the topics that we are interested in seeing how we can improve the quality of programming, integration, adaptive management, and sustainability. And that's why we are really excited to have the 3 presenters here helping us reflect on how that looks like in the field. So our objectives today are pretty simple. We at IDEAL aim to help improve learning processes, learning outcomes. So our goal today would be to reflect on the key lessons learned and applying best practices for these 3 concepts. We will be looking at 3 very unique contexts. As I mentioned before, we have the programs being implemented in Ethiopia, Bangladesh, and Zimbabwe. Very unique settings in themselves. In addition, those programs are at different stages of implementation. So it's going to be really interesting for us to hear from the COPs how these concepts look like when you apply them on the ground. I think in theory, we all understand the value of these concepts and how they help with resilience, but the application of these concepts can really vary depending on the context. So really looking forward to hearing your reflections on this. And then our agenda for today is pretty straightforward. We will be using a panel discussion format for our presentation. Our own program director, Penny Anderson, will be our moderator for today. Many of you may already know Penny. She's well known within the food security community. Before joining IDEAL, Penny spent 8 years as a food security director for Mercy Corps, but she's also held leadership positions in various countries, worked in Liberia, Afghanistan, Indonesia, and other places. So we're really pleased that Penny will be moderating the session today. The way we are going to go about with this is we'll have each of the COPs present on one aspect within their program. So we'll share reflections on integration with Michael, based on experience from the SPEAR program in Ethiopia. We'll also look at adaptive management and experience that Rakesh has had in Bangladesh. And then finally, we'll look at sustainability from the perspective of the Ensure program. So we'll start with some structured questions. Penny will walk the presenters through about half an hour of structured questions, and then we'll open it up for a Q&A session. For those joining us online, you can post your questions and your comments on the chat box, and our tech team will relay those to our moderator and presenters. So I'll go ahead and introduce our presenters today. I've had the privilege of working with all three gentlemen, and I can bear witness to their commitment and their professionalism. They're doing really great work out there in the field. So I'll start with Michael. Michael is the Chief of Party of the Strengthening PSNP4 Institutions Resilience SPEAR program in Ethiopia. He has more than 18 years of experience designing, managing, and evaluating international relief and development programs. Prior to his current role, Michael led similar programs in Tanzania, in DRC, as Country Director and Chief of Party. Michael holds a Master of Science degree in Applied Economics and Management from Cornell University. Our second panelist, Rakesh, is the Chief of Party for the FFP-funded Noble Jatra program in Bangladesh. He has over 27 years of experience supporting development and humanitarian programs in various countries. Prior to his current role, Rakesh was Director of Food Security and Livelihoods for Save the Children in Bangladesh. He also served as Country Director in Zambia and as Deputy Country Director in South Sudan, on Sun Worldwide. Rakesh holds a Master of Social Science degree in Development Studies from the Independent University in Bangladesh. And then our third panelist is Richard. Richard Ndau is the COP of the Food for Peace funded Ensure program in Zimbabwe. He has over 20 years of experience managing resilience and food security programs. Prior to his current role, Richard served as a Deputy Chief of Party on the same program, and also as a manager of Food for Peace funded Development Food Security program in Mozambique. Richard holds a Master of Science degree from Walden University in Baltimore. So I think for me, one of the interesting things is just the collective experience. Our presenters bring over 65 years of collective experience implementing these programs. Collectively, they are managing programs that are worth over $250 million, that are reaching over 400,000 households directly, and that have on their teams more than 3,000 employees and volunteers. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Penny to walk us through the panel discussion.
Okay, thanks very much, Gatal, and thanks to all of you here in the room and online who are joining us in a very happy morning in Washington, D.C., because the Nationals are going to the World Series. But to turn to global matters, I guess I'll start off by asking you, Michael, now the SPEAR program in Ethiopia, I know you're going to be talking about integration, and I imagine many of the people who are here with us know that in Ethiopia, the development food security activities are part of the Productive Safety Net program, the PSNP, which is a government-run program. And I have seen a copy of your program integration plan, and it looks like it's quite a mighty beast. There's a lot of integration apparently that's happening both within SPEAR and also more broadly with outside stakeholders. So can you walk us through, as a Chief of Party, how have you approached the question of integration, both internally and externally?
Sure. So let me walk us through a few slides on this. I'm also going to stand up if that's okay. So yeah, thanks for the question and thanks for this opportunity to share a little bit. As Penny mentioned, our program is closely tied in with the government's Productive Safety Net program in Ethiopia, which is one of the largest social safety nets in Africa, I think just behind South Africa, reaching over 8 million beneficiaries in chronically food insecure areas. So this is one of the investments. USAID is one of the partners supporting the government's Productive Safety Net program through this large, as many of you know, development food security activities funded by Food for Peace. So in Ethiopia, we're working in a couple of regions and implementing this program with about 1,600 staff and volunteers across 3 implementing partners, World Vision, CARE, and a local partner, Orda. And we also have learning partners, IFPRI, and a couple of local universities, Ambo and Awasa University. So just a kind of brief introduction to provide some context to what I'll be sharing. So yeah, getting right into it, I think when we talk about program integration, I think just to share a few things, examples from the design phase that we've really emphasized the importance of integration from the onset of the program. One of the examples I'll share is about improved poultry production. So according to our value chain analysis in each of the areas we're working, we looked at different opportunities, interests of our clients, and kind of market opportunities. And one of the value chains that was selected was improved poultry production. It's a very popular value chain with a lot of demand. It holds out a lot of promise, I think, in the kind of different contexts for empowering women, focused on nutrition, a lot of kind of things that are talked about in terms of its potential. But without really kind of a strong engagement involvement from the health and nutrition side, WASH side, there's also recent evidence in the literature about exposure, kind of association of small livestock with increased incidence of diarrhea and enteric environmental disorders. So there's also risk associated with it if it doesn't have a strong WASH component. So that's something that by design, maybe the livelihoods team is just kind of focused on the market objectives. Maybe there's kind of the token nutrition sensitive component or gender sensitive component, but really focused on nutrition from a WASH standpoint, also from consumption standpoint. So, it's a great income earner, but as well, without a strong promotion of the importance of own consumption, there's a missed opportunity there. Also, in Ethiopia, there's a lot of kind of other challenges around culture and kind of fasting periods. So a good portion of the country is fasting for over half of the year. There's fasting days that are kind of no animal protein products in the diet that is not supposed to be for children under 2 and pregnant and lactating women, but again, requires additional kind of support and emphasis to ensure that nutritional objectives are being met. Another one is in natural resource management. So just another example, in Ethiopia, there's these public works schemes that are associated with the social safety net. That if you've been to Ethiopia, it's a very hilly kind of, especially in the highlands, a lot of work has been done on these bench terraces. So years and years of bench terraces have been kind of done with public work labor, but kind of with some issues about sustainability. So for us, a strong kind of linkage with productive livelihoods, so focusing on soil enhancement, including compost and manure, and removing the top layer before kind of doing the construction of these bench terraces, and then putting the soil layer back on top, working on soil stabilizers that are fodder crops as well, dual purpose crops to protect the land. So again, it's something that our livelihoods team has really been kind of helping to make these investments really something that isn't just protecting the soil or the watershed, but a really productive investment community, and something that they themselves see the value of and in turn adopt in their own fields and contexts. So, and then lastly, around men's engagement. So, I think there's often kind of this, people are asked and they know about what, gender, okay, I have to go to a gender training, or there must be some gender module that you have to do. And so kind of, it's almost like people in the NGO world kind of have that mindset that, okay, yeah, I know what gender is. But for us, we've really tried to kind of at a design level integrate kind of men and women in some of our key platforms. So one of them is the Village Economic and Social Association, similar to VSLA basic groups. So often it's mostly focused on women, maybe a men's group, For us, we've really intentionally invited both husband and wife to participate in these groups and more or less have that as a model in our program that husband and wife are participating, that men, there's been a lot of reaction and feedback that men have said, yeah, before we didn't know what our wives were doing, we didn't support them. And additionally, there's a household level nutritional component that, again, before household level counseling, that before, is often kind of women counseling women about infant and young child feeding practices, but for us, again, it's a very targeted counseling towards men and women, and oftentimes mother-in-law. This is just a picture of one of our beneficiaries, hand washing. If you look at hand washing with soap rates in Ethiopia, it's kind of 1 to 2% or 2 to 3%, depending on where you are. So again, a big, important component. And then during integration, so one of the platforms that I've already mentioned, these basic groups, I think a lot of us have, maybe a producer group, a women's group, a mother's group, so there's often a lot of groups that are kind of associated with the different sectors or components. So for us, we've really decided, okay, let's have a common platform that this basic group will be the place where we can bring in different components of our program. And while we will have other groups, this is kind of the place where people will hear messages around gender, around health and nutrition, and be able to engage with the program in that way. And then active feedback loops. So for example, selecting vegetable varieties for promotion at the home gardening. It's one of those things that, if it's a value chain, the livelihoods guys, they're just focused on, okay, what's the market demand? What are we going to best supply to the market? But so really bringing in our nutrition folks and saying, well, actually, that's a good, product, but maybe let's consider something that's more nutrient rich, and at the same time promoting through our health and nutrition programming the importance of some of these vegetables. So kind of demand creation as well as identifying and supporting access to inputs for these improved nutritious vegetables, as well as kind of increasing market demand for those. And then lastly, so we recognized after we started our programming a high incidence of depression, maternal depression, as well as intimate partner violence, especially in one of our regions. And we said, think about the women that is experiencing intimate partner violence, is depressed. What's the chance that they're going to take up these economic livelihood opportunities? Or there's evidence in literature that there isn't, a strong take-up of infant and young child feeding practices and other things if you're depressed, if you're not receiving any support in this way. So kind of, again, seeing the whole picture and addressing one of the core underlying issues of the woman's own well-being and mental health before kind of bringing in other nutrition, livelihood opportunities, or integrating them together. Just briefly, I'll maybe have a chance to talk a little bit more about this in detail, but it doesn't just happen kind of naturally. I think a lot of us struggle that we're siloed or kind of focused. Each of us have our own programming areas to focus on, and maybe I'll leave a little bit of sharing on this for the what our approach has been. But basically, developing as Penny was referring to, a detailed plan, a spreadsheet, and monitoring process for us to kind of give focus and attention to this. And then lastly, it's a unique, as also Penny was referring to, a unique challenge/opportunity in Ethiopia, that there is a lot of investments in the same areas and overlapping in some of the districts. So we have to work very closely with other USAID programs and set up, again, structures to ensure collaboration and partnership and not duplication of efforts in areas that we overlap, and as well as supporting other government initiatives, the Sakota Declaration, and working with our government partners. So there's, as I think is the case in many different contexts, the different ministerial partners, there's different strong regional government partners that have their own priorities down to kind of a district level, a sub-administrative level. So really the beyond just internal emphasis on integrating our programs within our team, kind of the importance of engaging our stakeholders and bringing them together at relevant platforms, often at the district level, at the regional level, and federal level, to ensure that it's not just the Ministry of Agriculture doing something or Ministry of Health doing something, but together owning the process and supporting the program with that holistic perspective. So with that, I'll pass on to my next presenter. I think there'll be some more opportunities to get into some of these details in the question and answer period.
Actually, I'd love to ask a question straight off, which is, thank you so much, Michael, and that was really interesting, and hearing all the different ways in which you approached integration. And of course, it's at the activity level, working with all these other partners, but even down to the community level. You know, you're talking about involving wives and husbands and the mothers-in-law. It strikes me as taking like a lot of time and a lot of organizing. I mean, what are some of the challenges that you have faced trying to create something so very integrated?
Yeah, we don't have any challenges at all. Without any problem. Yeah, no, it's something that I think really is, if it's seen as something extra or something additional for people to do as part of their job, it's something that will always kind of get pushed off. And so I think it's something that we've strategically tried to incorporate and integrate into our regular processes, meetings. For example, our technical working group meetings. We have each of our different technical sectors is often can coordinate separate from each other at the beginning of our program. We just work out logistics-wise that, okay, the gender technical working group meeting is meeting this week, and somebody else is meeting the next week, and we said, okay, we're really missing an opportunity here. Let's, even though it's hard, let's push everybody to meet together, and let's get out to the field together. And so that's something that we've really instituted that has now become just part of our DNA, that, okay, yeah, we know technical working group meetings, we all have to block out that time. We have to go together. We're not going to kind of separately investigate different components of the program without understanding each other's elements. And so I think it's kind of by building in some of these things into our routine processes and expected areas of responsibility has been one thing. And then as well, from a management perspective, monitoring and checking in on it and reporting on it so people know, actually, we have to do something because I'm going to be asked as a part of my responsibility, what have I done this quarter on some of these commitments that I've made. So a couple of things.
Okay, well, thanks so much. And now we will turn to Bangladesh. And Rakesh, I've been reading up a little bit about the Novajatra program, which has got the ultra poor graduation model. And I know that adaptive management was sort of integrated right into the design of the program. So can you tell us more about that?
Sure. Yeah. And thank you so much. And thanks for that very interesting presentation, Michael. And again, good morning, everyone, and a very warm welcome to this presentation on Novajtra's adaptive management learning that we have had. As you mentioned, Penny, that we have had the adaptive management, or what we call the CLA, the collaboration learning, and the adaptive management inbuilt part of the design itself. When it comes to the entire program, but then focused on some specific components, and one of those components being the ultra-poor graduation model. Because you know that when in Bangladesh, the ultra-poor graduation model has been tried quite a lot, especially by BRAC. They have done some extensive work on this particular approach over the decades as such. So just before I get into the details, just wanted to again set a context that for Novajatra, this is again 5-year program, but then we have just been confirmed 2 years of course extension of this program. So we will have another 2 years to focus more on sustaining the outcomes of the program. Again, focusing on the same area as we were working as part of our main program. So we are working in the 4 quite geographically concentrated area, and only in 4 upzilas of the 2 districts. We are covering the entire population. And this is again one of those the areas where we work is what we call it from the climate change point of view, ground zero. Basically, this is the area which get affected by cyclones, the flooding, almost every year. It's only the scale and size differs, but cyclone almost every year. So when we talk about the importance of ultra-poor graduation program, it's really, again, in this area where people are really, again, struggling every year. And they don't have an option to move, given, I think you understand, the Bangladesh's own challenges, given that it's a delta, basically, where the flooding and the land access is very, very limited, and you are talking about almost like 170 million population, again, concentrated in this the small country. So basically, within this area of these 4 upazillas where we work, the level of poverty is rampant. We are looking at more than, this is the area where people should be relying on agriculture, but more than 60% of the population doesn't have access to land at all. So they are landless. So they really have to rely on the other options for their livelihoods, right? So as part of this program, we are covering the entire population of total around 900,000. We expect that by the time of once you conclude, we might be able to reach to almost 1 million people as part of this program. So, given the context that we work in, having the programs like ultra-poor graduation implemented, and knowing also that there has been lots of work already done on the UPG models in different contexts, we wanted to also try out that, given the needs that exist, can we really come up with different models which can help the ultra-poor people to graduate out of extreme poverty with the lesser amount of resources, and which are more effective and efficient, cost-effective models. So as part of that process, we have had initially only 2 cohorts as part of the program plan, and these were sequenced. So once we have the first cohort implemented for a year and a half, then we were to start the second cohort. That was basically to feed the learning from the first cohort into the second cohort. But then we also got an opportunity to have add another cohort, the third cohort. So overall, we are now reaching out to 21,000 ultra-poor population in this area, and the learning from the first and second cohort also fed into the third one. So, and let's talk about how did the adaptation work, and what really we see the changes in how these different the learnings and the models that we have now tried, how they are going to make one is these models more cost effective, but also helping these communities to sustain some of those changes in the longer term. So what we had as part of, again, the first phase was we deliberately have had the pause and reflect component in build, where after a year and a half of the first cohorts of implementation, we took a month to really go back and really again a quick research to understand how the community is perceiving the different components of the ultra-poor graduation model that we have put in, or how effective each one of them are, or how really we can make them more efficient. So we took time, and I think this is where I'll talk about some of the challenges, because the internal issues as well as the external issues, because when you really are providing what you are providing and you're making provision, really making those changes wasn't really an easy. People were really more looking forward to continuing with the kind of model which was heavily focused on lots of input support. So I think that was really, really important part of our process of pausing, reflecting, and then pivoting. And then I think having those focused in terms of our thematic learning plan that we had, on the activity learning plan that we had on the thematic areas as well as on the integration focus. And then I think the data that we have been collecting on a regular basis to really inform us, like when we talk about the adaptive management, it really, you really need to be able to have the regular flow of the data to analyze and really see the changes that you are making, they are not having negative impact. So you don't want to dilute the impact of the model, the approach that you have for the ultra-pro graduation with the changes, the adaptations that you have. So I think that was really important part of us as part of our M&D and the rapid research that we were doing along the way. And we have, in fact, we have had a partner come along, the learning partner that we have engaged to help us do that. I think I've covered most of it as part of the goal of our ultra-pro graduation is really to create sustainable pathways out of poverty for 21,000 ultra-pro households. We have had these 3 cohorts, and these are like all the participants of these approaches, all women, 100% women. And in fact, when we talk about that, those of them living on less than $1.9 per day, majority of them, quite a large number of them, I would say, were actually are destitutes, because they have, if you really go and see their living conditions, I mean, they would be below 90 cents of income per person per day. Really, this is how some of these households have been living on. So I'll just talk about the adaptations, the key adaptations. Given the time constraint, I'll just quickly focus on some of them. There were a number of the adaptations that we did. But between first and second cohort, what happened is that at the design phase, given the consortium approach that we had of the program, we ended up having 6 different partners, actually the 3 consortium partners and 3 implementing partners of them. And then another learning partners, 7 partners working on one component. Was very complex, very complicated. And I think this was in the spirit of that partnership that was done so that each one of them have a role to play. But I think we found it very, very difficult to really, when it comes to operationalizing that particular model, which we then, in the second cohort itself, we decided that really is not, one is that it's not cost effective. There's lots of overlap and duplication of efforts and the staffing that each of the partner really is having. And I think also quite a lot of the challenges with the understanding of different partners that was causing the challenges. So that one was one of those ones. In the second cohort, we streamlined the roles and responsibilities of the partners and really cut down and asked one of the partners, in this case, World Vision took lead on certain specific aspect, and that was more focused on the IGA training, linking it with our the entrepreneurship literacy trainings that we were organizing for 8 to 9 months. So that was one of those part to reduce the complexity, but then there were quite a number of other adaptations. So it wasn't really, again, easy for these partners to give up their component. They still all value is really important, what they are doing and others. But then I think that was just as part of the adaptation I'm talking about, that we really had to look at that whole aspect. Also, I think we were as part of our model, we had the business plan development at the 9th month of the model itself, which we realized as we were getting into the second cohort that that's too late. In terms of having those business plans developed and the asset transfer really happening at that stage. And that was basically that initially we were planning for the 9 months of the ELC, the entrepreneurship literacy training that we were organizing. So that one we had, the second cohort brought it earlier, and also the asset transfer we started much earlier, so that there is a more hands-on, I think, the learning that happens as part of this process. And also the asset transfer that was brought forward to the 5th month. It was earlier again at the 9th month that we had. That was again an adaptation. There were a couple of others, much smaller ones. But again, quick ones on the learning from the first, second, and feeding into the third one. I think we realized that there's still quite a lot that we can do to improve the efficiency, the cost effectiveness of our model, and I think this is where we made again further changes, and here we now took approach of one having the standard design, the approach that we have had. That standard is really the individuals really that we were reaching out. we really felt that we can be more cost-effective, efficient, have reduced number of staff if we can have the group approach. And the third one we really focused was on the empowerment. And quite a lot of this really is also coming from the graduation to resilience, the model that is being tried in Uganda. We have actually been in touch with them as well to learn from them as to what research that they are doing. And in fact, we have been also talking to the FFP at the headquarters to really pick their brain in terms of what the learning agenda, the learning question that we can respond to part of this particular model. So again, not getting into detail, but then the issues around in the standard, we are now, instead of 9 months, we have actually condensed the training period. The 6 months, we actually are looking at the smoothing transfers and all that. This is all standard. Whereas for the group, what we are really doing is that this individual coaching is not happening. It's really more focused on the group approach itself. And again, on the empowerment, the key thing that we are doing is that we are not doing, we are just the asset transfer or the cash that we are transferring, we are not doing for this particular empowerment group. They are really being facilitated to access the cash through VSLA, or we are also linking them to the banks itself to be able to access the resources to start the businesses. So I think this is the key changes, the adaptations that we have done. We really haven't got the impact study out yet on this one as to how it is changing, but then we really see that this particular model, again, from the learning, the earlier learning, this should really be having much higher impact on what really we have been able to make the changes. Again, I think I'll get into more details during the Q&A. I'd like to stop there. These are some of the impacts that we have had, and these are very early ones during the first cohort. In fact, we have an updated one. I haven't really included that here. I will like to stop here and hand over the stick to the pointer basically to Richard to take us to the next stage of the presentation. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Rakesh. All right, and moving on to Zimbabwe. Richard, I know that it's the last year of the Ensure program, and of course, sustainability and looking at how the program is going in building sustainability is a huge part of exit plans. And my understanding actually is that Ensure has already exited from some of the communities, so you can continue monitoring and mentoring. Tell us more about that. How have you approached sustainability?
Okay, thanks, Ben. Just as a way of a background, I think the project is being implemented in a very unique context. Those that familiar with what is happening in Zimbabwe, the economy is not doing so well. We have had 3 droughts and 2 cyclones. So that has been a very, very difficult context under which we implemented the project. But I think we did so well. I'll share some bit of results from our headline evaluation, which was just concluded. But Ensure is a consortium of 4 partners, Care, World Vision, which are the main implementing partners. 2 geographical locations, which we call provinces, and then we have 2 technical partners, and a service provider, which is a research institute. The project has basically 3 strategic objectives. The first one that focuses just on nutrition and wash interventions. The second one, which is aiming at improving household income, basically that's the agriculture piece. The third one is resilience and natural resource management. So, and then we did work right from the beginning. As part of the design, we had a list of things that we called sustainability factors. There were 5 of them. It was just more of this, don't do this, do that, don't do this. But I think we got a bit more structured after the further study that was concluded in 2016 and the board published. And then we decided to reflect and look at how we developed our own sustainability, and then we can be able then to adapt it to the project. So we did that in 2017, and it was developed based on the 4 pillars that are in that report, which is issues on motivation, issues on resources, and linkages and capacity. So we did reflect as a team, and again, like other projects, we are working in structures that we call technical working groups. Essentially, when we started them, they were more standardized material, but as we were moving along, they were evolving with time. But as we did that review, we looked at what was already in place. What did we do to make sure that we reflect and build on what we've already been doing? And then the other thing is also how then did we work to modify, or are there things that we're able to enforce and make sure that they are really emphasized? And lastly, what were the key assumptions for us to be able to get that sustainability plan? And then we were also lucky that we got a project extension. Project extension which was 2 years, and initially the project was 5 years. We are now in the final year, the 7th year, and we are going to get it by end of next year. So the main focus of the cost extension was to make sure that we build on what we've already done. Provided some light touch in terms of implementation and allowing people to do things on their own. We're only playing a facilitating role, and we've seen that even the projects that we started early into the project, we're visiting them from time to time, and we could see them already moving on their own. So essentially, yes, true, we have already moved away from certain communities that we felt were already had enough capacity to be able to do things on their own, and we're focusing more time on projects that still had problems. So we will provide the monitoring, mentoring, and customized coaching, depending on what help is, and that's when that's what we're focusing on. And of course, we're working through community structures. We set up community structures that we felt were going to be able to support those groups that we formed, the care groups, producer and marketing groups, village savings and loans. So for marketing, we're working with what we call the market facilitators. Those are the ones that were brokering deals between the private sector and producers. And those, we allowed them to broker deals with the private sector, and then we are only providing that supportive role. And then the other thing is we also work with cluster facilitators for VS&L. VS&Ls we have a number of VS&L spec group that then form a cluster, and that cluster is managed and monitored by a local structure which is called a cluster facilitator. Just to give you some of the examples of things that we felt are sustainable intervention. There are quite a number that I can share, but I thought I could just pick those 2 slides, just a few of them, and then explain what is happening there. You can see we have a garden there, which is very great. I think this is one of the interventions that we do, and we promote this based on the dam. So the water source is a dam that we have constructed. And the way we identify those projects is we do community assessment just to be sure that we address the needs of that particular community. And the top in the list, usually, some of those risks and problems that I encountered is the issue of water, because the project is located in Natural Region 4 and 5, which are the marginal areas. But then, we then develop dams and irrigation schemes, and these exactly are the kind of projects that we do. And if you look at this project, essentially, all those 4 pillars are addressed on sustainability, the issues of resources. So people are able to get resources, they are able to get money that they can be able to reinvest into other activities. There are also issues of linkages, both horizontally and vertically, the private sector and even the government that provides extension services. There is also the issue of capacity. In each of these sites, we have a local extension agent who is from government, who provides that extension services, providing that technical support. So those 4 pillars, they are all there, and we want to make sure that they are addressed in every part of the project that we do. And we want to continue in making sure that as we monitor those 4 pillars are all addressed. And we encourage a lot of diversification on-farm and off-farm activities. So all the things that are happening at a household level, they are being recorded by that household to make sure that their own, we keep track of things that are happening at household as a result of the project. So that is happening. And then we also do a lot of linkages to make sure that those producers have access to resources, access to finance. They get finance from the service groups that they are all participating in. They also get funding from financial services. We do linkages with financial service providers, banks, microfinance institutions. And then also there is the issue of equitable access to lender. Issues around gender, we discuss those issues quite a lot. So there's a cross-cutting theme with gender interventions that we do. And the way we do our gender interventions is dialogue. We don't necessarily train, we dialogue. And that dialogue process is coming from a process that we call social analysis and action, where we identify gender issues in different areas. And as you know, gender issues are very contextual. So whatever we discuss here on gender issues in the other area, they're completely different. And our strategy on gender is by strategic objective. Because issues on nutrition, they are different from issues of agriculture, issues of access of land and so forth, and natural resource management. So that's how we're managing that. And so during those discussions now, we're realizing that women have now access to productive assets, land and livestock. Bigger livestock normally are owned by men in our context, but right now, because of the resources that women now have, they are able to own the cattle. So we have good examples of that. And then we also do a lot of soil and water conservation. The water in the dams are not necessarily enough to water and supply gardens throughout the year, but we make sure that we conserve whatever water is there in the gardens and we reduce a number of evaporation and then continue the use of water. Then the last one, as I was saying, that the issues of access, women now have access to bigger assets, productive assets. You can see some of the cattle that are bought by women that are involved in village savings and loans, or the cattle that have it. So continuing the gender dialogues, they are helping us, helping the communities just get to the point where they are able to have those productive assets. So I think for now I will end here. In the interest of time, I would share quite a number of these such interventions that we feel as a project are more sustainable. They address all those 4 pillars of the fund study.
Great. So in a moment, we will open it up in the room and online for questions, but I'm actually going to take the moderator's privilege and Richard, ask you one quick follow-up question. You were talking about the different components for building sustainability, and I know you were talking about access to resources, access to credit, and how that contributes to sustainability. But I know in a lot of contexts, it can be very difficult when, for example, you've got volunteer health workers, where it's harder to identify where the resources are going to come from when you think, what's your sustainability strategy? Was that a challenge you faced within Ensure?
It was. I think it's a challenge that didn't only affect Ensure, it affected a number of programs in the country. And it's an issue that we discussed at length during a number of our meetings as a program and with the donor. But it's in our context, different donors and different programs, they incentivize village health workers in different ways. So that's the first difficult part, because it's not uniform. Everyone does what he feels is able to do. But for us, because we're not giving incentives, what we did, we just made sure that all those volunteers, we encouraged them to participate in multiple interventions. So if a village health worker can also participate in service groups, they can also participate in producer and marketing groups, so they're able to sell stuff into the private sector, and then they can get resources for themselves. It's also a balancing act. Their time is very, very limited because they're pulled all over the place by different programs. But we were intentional that way, just to make sure, because we didn't have any other resources that would give them, just make sure that they are involved in a number of programs and so that they can benefit.
I just would like to add that as part of the sustainability strategy in Bangladesh, what we are really seeing, because that's the very very challenging issue really when it comes to really sustaining the interest of the community health volunteers to really continue beyond the life of the project without any incentivization or any other way of recognizing them. So we have one of those models, and this is many of the other trials that we are having, is that it's a social marketing company who actually have the plan that they have is to sell certain products that are more related to health and hygiene, and this includes the micronutrient powders, it includes the sanitary pads, and also some basic, the way BRAC has its the Swasthya Sevikas and Swasthya Karmis as extension workers. So this is where now these the health volunteers that are trained as part of Navajatra are now being graduated to be what they call them the community sales agents. But they are essentially the health workers, those who will be again involved as part of the GMP sessions that are organized in the immunization centers and others. But then they are going to be able to make some income by selling these products that they will sell. So that would really continue to have, and then they will also, of course, be continuously trained and oriented by SMC, but also the other institutions that really are interested in further, continuing that dissemination of the support to the communities. That's just really one model where, seeing that how this community health workers are able to make some money as they are really doing the voluntary work. And I think there's a gap in Bangladesh when you know that each of the community clinic, which is supposed to be serving about 6,000 population, are serving almost like 15 to 20,000. So they are stretched. The health structures are very overstretched. So having this kind of models also tried, I think is something that I think has worked in some limited areas. But then we, as part of Navajatra, we are looking at also adopting that model in our program area.
Okay, great. Well, let's see what questions we have for the panel. And if you have a question, if you can also tell us who it is directed to. Yes.
Thank you. My name is Francis. I'm a former student of Evaluation Measurement and Research from Western Michigan University. My question is directed to Mr. Rakesh. Thank you for the good work you are doing, because I know I've been experiencing cyclones and then almost 60% of the population are landless. I know how difficult it is. But my question is, given that 60% of the population where you are working and implementing programs is landless, what adaptive mechanisms have you put in place to ensure that those people are on board, or you are only focusing on those who have that? Thank you.
No, I think the focus, of course, is on the people, those who do not have land, and there's quite an extensive work that we really are doing on the alternative livelihood options that are really, not necessarily focused on the agriculture, but then they're linked to the agriculture, but also the off-farm, interventions where we are really training, lots of these households in say the embroidery. Others are those who are making the jute mats. The others are making some of those the caps that are being exported to say the Middle East and all that. So we are doing, and so we are almost like focusing on the 26 different alternative livelihoods options that are not necessarily focused on the agriculture. So that's really, I think, is the idea. But also, like some of these households, given the access to the sea and the water ponds that they have, so we are also working on the aquaculture. We're trying to promote the way how they can really make the livelihood out of that option. We actually we have diversified our different options to help these communities to be able to generate income that can sustain their household when it comes to the food security part.
Okay, we've got more questions in the room. You might have questions online too. Let's find out what these questions are, and if you can tell us who they are directed to.
Yeah, hi, my name's Tom Hurley. I work at DT Global. This is a really fascinating presentation. I really appreciate being here. I haven't heard anything about a communication strategy and how that might play into sustainability. When you're trying to reach 1 million people, can you talk about how you might be using the radio, local radio stations, and secondly, mobile phones to get out messages? Thank you.
Okay, and let's just take this question before we go over to the answers.
Sure, it's actually two questions. My name is Carla Brooks. I'm with Heifer International. The first question is for you, Michael, just regarding, you mentioned about working a lot within the poultry value chain and also about some of the coordination mechanisms with the government. So as we look at the poultry value chain and maybe looking at WASH, you talked about and how important it is in order to basically have a clean area for backyard poultry. Have you explored anything kind of with biogas and looking at ways to use some of the feces that can be used as an alternative source of energy? And then the other question just is directed for Zimbabwe in terms of what the recent kind of activities that happened with the cyclone in the area. What are the coordination activities maybe that are going on with the World Bank and the activities that they're doing there?
Okay.
Sure. Okay. No, good questions. In terms of communications, unfortunately, many of the areas we're working in Ethiopia are still quite remote, even though there's a lot in the news about kind of increased cell phone use and penetration of cell phones. Our beneficiaries, well, overall in general, in many of these remote rural areas, access to a smartphone might be 4 or 5%. Generally, a cell phone, maybe about half of people might have access to a cell phone. But yeah, network might not be consistent, and even so, in the areas we're working with kind of the lowest quintile, or 10 or 15% of the wealth ranking of population. So often, we're not working with people that typically have access to cell phones. Actually, radio usage has interestingly been going down. For different reasons. So yeah, I think we have to be a little bit creative in terms of our communication strategy. I think there's a lot of desire, and kind of there've been different groups that are doing. There's a group there called Digital Green that's doing kind of small pico projectors that share messaging through that mechanism. There's different people that are trying different things, but really, we also have to be a bit practical and realistic that the context we're working in isn't yet to that maybe extent of using technology, and so we're using technology to its fullest potential. So often we're really cascading messages through people. So we have, as I mentioned, 1,600 staff, and some of those are stipended volunteers. So it's really a kind of extensive network of people at various levels that are eventually communicating to our core program clients. Maybe I'll talk a little bit more offline. I think I have some other ideas I could share. On the poultry value chain, yeah, it's something that we've been fortunate in our context. There's a number of actors that in the private sector that are promoting and kind of have developed breeds that are much more productive than the local kind of chickens that are there. So there's improved breeds that are producing maybe 4 times as much. We've been, in terms of eggs, and have a higher growth rate in terms of meat. The biogas is something that we actually have kind of done some demonstration around. It's quite, even though relatively it doesn't look like a big cost or kind of requirements in terms of the support. It's been still challenging to envision that kind of rolling out more broadly, just because of the kind of technology and kind of associated maintenance and ongoing support for those designs. So it's something we're looking at, but haven't kind of saw the opportunity perhaps to expand more broadly. but are using or kind of promoting feces use for compost, and because it's a semi-scavenging system, as I was mentioning with WASH, ensuring that it's not around the household that children are exposed to it.
Can I, please? Yeah, I think I'm sure. Yeah, we did use quite extensively the mobile platform, WhatsApp to messaging, especially for disseminating and weather information. So this is one of the things that we've been promoting, just to make sure that we disseminate information widely. I think we've been promoting linkages, and part of the linkages has been the committees that, the resilience committees that are based at a community level that are linked with the MET services department. So information comes from the tribal services into those community focal point persons, and then disseminate that information horizontally to the other community members. They use quite a number of platforms, other platforms not necessarily on the phones. They also use schools, sending information through school children, and even community gatherings, so they make sure that they take advantage of every gathering to disseminate early warning information. Even during the recent cyclone that happened in March, there's so much information that went through WhatsApp. Whether people were able to heed that information is something else, but information went out, and everyone was aware that there is a cyclone that was coming. So I think this is one. We also did work with the MET services to disseminate community radios in fewer communities. Of course, we didn't do full coverage because of limited resources that the government has, but for that particular community, we were able to send community radios, and information goes to those radios coming from the MET services, just for early warning, and that also helps the farmers to make decisions in terms of what to plant and when to plant. So I think that's one. And coming into a question on the coordination after the cyclone, yeah, I should admit that there was a lot of confusion, unfortunately, when such kind of emergency happened. Initially, everyone was responding, and the coordination was not as good. But I think it started getting a bit orderly as we were moving. And I think it was managed by the government civil protection unit. And they just wanted to make sure that all the interventions that are being all the programs that are being implemented there were well coordinated, and there were no overlaps. But in the initial stages, there were so many overlaps. I did go there myself, I saw it. A number of organizations were just bringing whatever they had, and most of it was duplication. But now I think there's a bit of order. It's still the government that is coordinating.
But if I just can respond to one of the questions related to communication. In Bangladesh context, I think this is we are quite advanced in terms of having, which is a small country, right? Access to the network is not a problem because it's really kind of all 100%, quite strong coverage. Like all these 4Gs is all over the places. Only challenge that really was there was like people who have access to the handset. Not all of them have these smartphones as such, but then like we did a survey, about 80% of the people, the households have access to some kind of a phone. So these are the smaller ones, even for 800 taka to 1,000 taka, really, which is about less than $10 is what really you are able to get those phones there. So we actually, as part of Navajatra, used the mobile phones very extensively. And every week for the pregnant and lactating women, we are disseminating 2 messages to the pregnant woman herself. This is a voice message, because knowing that this message is not in Bangla, the script, it's in English script, and many of them, they are not able to read that. So it was very felt that we should send the voice messages. So it's about a 1-minute message that really is, that is linked to the stage of the pregnancy and as the child really grows. So as we start registering them at the second trimester of their pregnancy, and the messages really go up to when the child is 24 months old. So 2 messages every week to the pregnant and lactating woman, and then 1 to the what we call the the gatekeepers, the mother-in-law and the husband themselves. So we get their numbers and others because our staff are on ground, so we were able to get that. And that really has been extensive coverage because that we have really also found to be very cost effective. It's a reinforcing the messages that are, are discussed during the courtyard sessions and the monthly, the meetings that really that happens at the community level. So that's really the use of the mobile phones for the messaging, but also the same mobile phones are used for the conditional cash transfer, those who qualify for the cash transfer that we are doing about $26, $27 every month to the pregnant and lactating women. So this is now the e-wallet that they are actually the part of the financial inclusion. Many of these women never exposed to really when it comes to really having an account. So this is basically an account with the financial institution. They can save the money there, they can withdraw whatever amount that they want. They can really, do many different things. They can transfer that money for somewhere else if they really want. That's really another use of the digital technology that we are doing quite extensively. Radios, as you guys mentioned, it's really becoming less popular these days. Of course, people really are having access to the TV and all that, even if they don't have it at their own house, they really are accessing it from other places. So we did try actually, as part of our this male engagement gender work, initially engaging the community radios, but we didn't find it as effective. So we started using even this local cable networks really for sending that message. I just wanted to also mention in passing that those 20%, because we said that 80% have the access, households have access to the mobile phones, the 20% who did not have access. So we came up with a device, it's a Garmin Intel also in Bangladesh. It's a bangle actually, so I didn't bring it there. And I think this is, again, I can use this as an opportunity. If you want to see what this looks like, if I may, Penny here, that we are having a photo exhibition being organized at World Vision offices tomorrow from 4 to 6. If you really want to see this, even this bangle, where there's a picture, I remember we have the woman listening to the message. So these are actually quite robust bangles, which actually again, because in Bangladesh women put the bangles on. So that has actually, again, messages on a weekly basis, they play the message. This is now the NCHN message that is played automatically. They really have a button to push. And this is, again, for 9 months, they don't have to charge this, the battery of that particular device, the bangle that is there. So for these 20% women, I think I didn't bring that bangle here, I should have. I didn't know that this issue was going to come up. So this is that we have distributed to almost 5,000 of these pregnant and lactating women. So every 9 months that they bring back that device, it's really charged within an hour or so. And it's given back. And then the messages are synchronized with the LMP, basically the stage of the child growth. You don't talk about the messages that are relevant for pregnant women to the mother who has a 6-month-old child. So really, the messages are also synchronized to the stage of the pregnancy or the lactation. And that bangle actually has been very, very effective. And government of Bangladesh has shown lots of interest in terms of really, using this kind of technology. We haven't really gone very far with this yet, but then we have those discussions. I just wanted to share that we are really doing quite a lot of those digital use of the digital technology, basically.
Okay, thanks so much. I think we have some questions online, so we will go to our online audience for a moment.
Yeah, sure. So we have several questions from our online audience. I'll start with 2 of them. One from Ryan Robinson, who is directing his question to Michael. And the question, Michael, is, does your program include any interventions to increase domestic resource mobilization? How are you helping increase the government's capacity to raise revenues? I can also give a second question. This one is directed to Rakesh. Rakesh, can you talk a little bit more about adaptive management as it relates to SPC? Can you provide examples of how the project adapted to changing market conditions or unexpected behaviors?
Okay, take it away, Michael.
So basically on the adaptive management or the SBCC that we have had, the extensive work that we are doing is on the WASH related, the sanitation and hygiene messages that are, we are actually reaching to almost 550,000 total people really, with our SBCC messages, and these are all very organized. We have 6 sessions, like when we say that somebody has attended the SBCC session, so they have to attend 6 sessions, and each one of those sessions is about an hour and a half, what they have to attend. So we, I think, and as we went through the process, when we started that whole modules that we have for the SBCC, we realized that the initial 1 or 2 sessions that we were organizing focused only on the sanitation and hygiene. There was quite a lot of interest in people really showing up. But then the later session, the number of the people that were attending really went down significantly. And we realized that that's really, I think, we are not achieving what really we need to achieve. So what we did is then we combined our SBCC sessions of WASH with MCHN. Because we are reaching the entire population in the same area. So the idea is, as I mentioned, that in the 4 upzilas where we work, we cover the entire population. So we realized that that could be a much better way of really combining these sessions and really having 30 minutes or 35 minutes dedicated to the wash related, the hand washing and the safekeeping of the water, as well as the latrines that are being constructed as part of the program, its upkeep and all those related messages, even including the menstrual hygiene and the other messages that we were providing. So the adaptation that we did was really to combine and have the combined module for the WASH and the MCHN. So there was actually much higher interest, and the coverage that we were able to do was much higher as part of these changes. So this was one of those adaptations that comes straight to my mind when you were talking about what was the adaptive management on the SBCC. So this was one of those. And of course, on the messages and others, also we were doing all the regular barrier analysis in terms of why people are not practicing certain behaviors, even if they have the knowledge and the information about it. So we also adapted our messages, our approach to the SBCC, like using the school platforms, but also carrying out those different rallies and celebrating these the World Water Day and World Sanitation Day and others, to really reach out the much bigger number of the stakeholders who really have a role to play to make sure that those behaviors are put in practice. I'll stop there in terms of how the adaptation that we did in SBCs.
Yeah, on the Ethiopia context, I'm not quite sure the question, but maybe let me kind of take an element of it in terms of domestic resource raising and kind of working with the government. So in the sense of supporting the government's social safety net program, a large part of it is bilateral supported. The kind of they're trying to transition it on budget support from the Ethiopian government over time, and that's kind of the plan and projection for the sustainability of this program. But maybe in terms of just reflecting a little bit of the context of Ethiopia, I kind of was sharing a challenge on the technology side, but just to kind of put in context, the country's economic growth has been one of the fastest growing economies. The government has put huge investments in infrastructure, so roads and kind of access to markets have been improving. 11-fold increase in electricity capacity that have been kind of ongoing investments in electrification as a part of one of the government's strategies for rural electrification. But as that ties into our program, a lot of the value chains we're working on and focus we're giving is focused on a lot of the demand that's created by rapid population growth and urbanization, especially in these secondary and tertiary cities where are experiencing about double the growth rate of the capital city, Addis, and actually 2/3 of the urban population is in these secondary and tertiary cities. So even though we're working in remote kind of rural locations, tying in our producers into improved kind of agri-food systems that are kind of linking in with this increased demand in neighboring or nearby regional or zonal urban populations. So kind of as these linkages are made and as the productive systems are kind of put in place, I think in general we're creating and responding to demand by essentially generating more food commodities and products that reduce dependence and reliance on external exports. So that's one way of perhaps considering or responding to that question.
Can I also share an example in Zimbabwe?
Of course.
Yeah, on adaptive management. I think as we were starting to study, this component where we're distributing CSB, concept to pregnant mothers, lactating mothers and children under 2. So we have this faith-based group is called the Zionists that didn't want to participate in the program because they generally don't go to hospitals. So anything that has to do with hospitals, they don't want to get there, even for antenatal care, they were not going. So, and our distributions were clinic-based because we were also promoting the antenatal care facilities clinics. So we did engage them, and unfortunately we were not winning as much until we engaged their umbrella body, which is called Tutasism. So we engaged their leaders, their bishops, and then they engaged them. So as we were engaging them, we realized that there were some of them that were nicodemously going to clinics without the knowledge of the husband or without the knowledge of their churches. So we took advantage of that interest, and we did a lot of messaging around this CSP that we're distributing, and also the benefit that they can accrue getting the CSP, and also trying to also make sure that they get messages, SBC messages, through care groups. And fortunately, I think we won, and some of those groups now were even part of the care group leaders. They were actually leaders on their own now within the community. And I don't think we had, at the end of the distribution cycle in March, I don't think we had any of those groups that were not participating in. So I think that's how we then changed, and we also moved away, in some cases, to accommodate their interests. We moved away from distribution to clinics, and they distributed some few meters away from clinics.
Okay. Yes, questions here in the room?
Oh, sorry. Good morning. Thank you so much for all the insights shared. I had 2 questions for Mr. Richard in Zimbabwe. So you had talked about the early warning systems, and this is based on my experience, at least in the Sahel. If I compare, at least, I could be wrong, if I compare, let's say, for instance, the US meteorological system data compared to what I'll get in Burkina, there's a very big difference. And I'm not sure if you found yourselves having to rely on a different source of information, or were you solely reliant on the metadata data to be able to feed your early warning system? I don't know if it was sufficient, if it was accurate, I don't know. That's the first question. And then the second question, you had talked about assets, you had built dams, okay? And one thing I've found, at least based on my experience in terms of sustainability of a dam, okay, it's easy to think about the construction of the dam, the maintenance of the dam, make sure it's well constructed, make sure it's well maintained for sustainability. But one aspect that's often forgotten, even in my own village where I come from, is really the management of the resource that's being saved there. So for instance, if you have a dam, you might be intending it for irrigation, and then someone down the road will put a column to go to their own farm, or there'll be cows there, and maybe you want to use it also for, for whatever resource, whatever they're using it for. Have you found yourselves in situations where you've actually had to put in place a system for the use of the natural resource of that water that's in that particular asset? Because I feel like that's a very big component of sustainability. Could you share a bit more about that?
Okay. Before you answer, Richard, I just want to see if there's, first of all, is there another question here in the room and then online? Because I think this will be the last grouping of questions before we wrap up. So, my goodness, so many questions. I saw your hand first, so I'll ask your question.
I was a project manager for Population Health and Environment Project, and we also worked in Ethiopia, and one of the things, and the Philippines, and a number of other countries in Africa, but one of the things, and I'm talking about the higher up management level, because that often gets neglected when we talk about the field. We were supposed to develop and carry out an integrated system. And of course, people living in the communities understand integration because that's their life. Their lives are integrated, they're not siloed. But when it came to all the donors, you could only spend NRM money on this, and you could not spend BCC money on integrated messages. You can only use family planning money or health money for this, but they were all feeding into an integrated program. So did you have that as an issue in your programs? And if so, how did you address it? Because I find that sometimes the higher up is the more bigger stumbling block than some of the issues in the field.
And before we answer that, do we want to have one more question from online?
Actually, there's two quite straightforward questions. So one is from ICOM. People are interested in learning more about the program integration tracking tool that your program uses, so if you can elaborate more on that. Then Richard, if you can elaborate more about the customized mentoring approach that Shure uses.
And here, you are all used to addressing challenges, so here is another. We have exactly 5 minutes for all answers, for all of these questions. Take it away.
Okay, can I start? I'll take away all the time. Right, I think on the issue of dams, the dams are not, when we do dams, we are not only thinking of irrigating. It's multi-use. So we irrigate, we provide water even for livestock, we construct livestock water troughs, so that those that are not benefiting from the garden, they can also water their animals. And we also think of the catchment area. We do lots of catchment work, and up there we add value onto the catchment. We do a number of income generating activities, planting livestock fodder, like banana grass, for example. And then we also do a lot of beekeeping at the catchment. So when you think of a dam, don't think about just irrigating. It's meant for multi-use and for different categories of beneficiaries. So, but we did have a challenge in some cases. I think you gave a very practical example to say there could be someone who can divert the water and irrigate his own garden. That happened in one of the locations, and I think that is still a challenge. But there are structures that are in place that make sure that those kind of conflicts are resolved. First of all, it is resolved at a local level by the Asset Management Committee and the actual users of the asset. They try to resolve that, but if they fail, then they escalate it to the district administrator, who is the person who is in charge of conflict resolution. So that's one. Number two, the question on met information. Yes, we relied on both, but fortunately, I don't think we have had any variations per se, because whatever information we were getting, even from regional met services, was very much in line with what the local met services was also providing. Usually, the local met would not release any focus before the regional does. And, yeah, so we didn't have any major discrepancies in terms of the accuracy of information.
Okay. Just quick one. I think just to answer your question on the integration, the challenges in terms of, fortunately, we have been very, very lucky in this sense that our programs are so adaptive, and it's really the flexibility that FFP provides us in terms of how really we need to make the changes on a regular basis to ensure that this integration is really at a different level that we have to work on. I think internally as part of the program, regular changes that we have to undertake, we are able to do that one. So I think that's the only addition that I wanted to clarify, that for us, this being 5-year and now 7-year program, we are able to on an annual basis based on the learning, and not only really on annual basis, in between also if we really see that there is a need to make some significant changes or the minor changes, tweaking to ensure better outcome of our program interventions, we are able to make those changes. And I think our donors have been, in this particular case, USAID has been very, very receptive, as long as we are able to provide them strong justification and reason behind it, they are working hand in hand with us on that particular area. So I think in that sense, we do not see that to be a challenge for our program.
Yeah, I think just to echo what Rakesh is saying, yeah, the USAID Office of Food for Peace resource is one of these unique resources that has quite a bit of flexibility. But maybe to add to the context of Ethiopia, one of the advantages of this larger social safety net program is that all of the donors have essentially committed to it, but it's really owned and managed by the government. So everyone who is partnering and supporting this program essentially follows the very detailed program implementation manual, which is often referred to as like the Bible of this program that everyone has to kind of adhere to and follow very closely. So I think, at least in our context, to that kind of challenge of perhaps different resources or different kind of priorities by supporting a large government-led program, there's a strong kind of at least acceptance and acknowledgement that maybe certain priorities needed to be downplayed by one donor or kind of prioritized by another, but it all needed to fit within this comprehensive program. On the program integration question, certainly it's like many things in our world, a big spreadsheet. So you have your big IPTT and your other big spreadsheets, and so it can be a little bit daunting. Our tracking tool has a lot of detail in it on kind of within sector work and responsibilities to collaborate with others, kind of points of others kind of collaborating on specific activities or sub-activities. I think the practical side of it is there's essentially also a schedule of when this activity is happening, a couple of notes on, okay, how we're going to actually do this, what's the timeline, who's going to follow up, and so kind of rather than just, theoretically, these are some things we're expected to all do together, there's some practical component of when these actions will take place, who is following up on it, and kind of a close timeline that's included there. But yeah, it's something that, unless it is regularly referred back to and included in our kind of routine and regular processes, yeah, it's just going to be a big spreadsheet sitting somewhere on somebody's computer. So something that requires that active engagement with it.
And then a response to the question from Vital.
You've got 20 seconds.
Online. Okay. So different groups perform differently. So for us to be able to focus our training, we need to just focus on certain weaknesses of a particular group. Like one group is weakness of governance, we deal with that. Another group is issues of the financial literacy, we do refreshers, we train them depending on the gap that we see. So this has been the focus for this particular phase, when we're just looking at different gaps that we see in groups as we're monitoring, and then we focus our training, simply focus, just a discussion, not a fully fledged training like what we did when we started.
Thank you very much. I know there are more questions, and I invite my colleague Gatau to come up and ask if people have more questions or want to give us feedback on the session today. What should they do, Gatau?
One more. Yeah. So actually, can we start by giving a round of applause? So yeah, we had questions that we didn't get to. And what we would like to request is that you can email us at info@fsnetwork.org. If you can email us your questions, we'll follow up with the presenters and make sure that we follow up to that. So thank you very much. I hope you all enjoyed today's presentation. We hope to make this part of a series where we tap field voices. People can come in and share their reflections to the deal. As we come to the end of our event this morning, I'd like to ask you to take a minute or two to complete an evaluation. We value your feedback and want to know how your experience was for this particular event, and that's going to help us to improve events in future. So please take a moment. The evaluation can be found on that link, ideal.events/eval. Please don't Google that. If you Google that, it will take you someplace else. So you can enter that exactly as it's in the search box of your browser. So you can take a minute or two to complete that. Otherwise, from the Ideal side, we're really grateful that you were able to join us either in person, online, and we look forward to continue engaging with you. If you haven't done so, please sign up for our newsletter. That way you can keep up with what's going on in Ideal. Also, thank you very much, everyone, and happy Wildful Day.
Yes, thank you so much, Penny. Yes, yeah, that was really good.
Thank you.
I want to